to some people. I see on, which is great. I think we're good to start. So Janse, can I hand over directly to you?
Certainly. Good morning, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this morning's dialogue by the Presidential Climate Commission on Climate Smart Agriculture. My name is Janse Rabi. I'm a commissioner with the Presidential Climate Commission, representing the agricultural sector. You'll have seen our agenda for today, and it's a packed one. I'm extremely excited to see the participants in today's discussion, and I'm looking forward to the talks that we're going to be having on this very important topic. This is not the first discussion that's been held on climate smart agriculture, and certainly won't be the last. But it's extremely exciting to know that we're in a period where we stand almost at the cusp of what I feel is a revolution in the agricultural sector. Many of you know that the 1950s was the first and original green revolution as a global phenomenon. It transformed agriculture by introducing new technologies that increased crop yields and food production altogether. However, today's green revolution poses new challenges to farmers. These challenges include ongoing load shedding, the effects of climate change, and the move away from fossil fuels. Like the predecessors who adopted to the changes of climate change through the 20th century's green revolution, today's farmers also face a raft of issues that could impact their futures as well as ours. They work their way around man-made problems like load shedding, but they must also remain focused on keeping pace with constantly shifting trends to successfully adopt sustainable and environmentally friendly practices powered by renewable energy resources. I recently read a report by the Secretary General, or a speech rather, by the Secretary General of the United Nations at a food summit that was held almost exactly 2 years ago in New York. And his opening paragraph of his speech struck me when he said that rich or poor, young or old, every person in the world needs to eat. And this is important. Safe and nutritious food provides not only life and health, but also, and very importantly, hope. Every day, billions of people harvest, process, and transport food to market and to our homes. Consumers make choices of what to eat based on what is available and what is accessible. Daily activities related to agriculture touches all of us and underpins our cultures, our economies, our relationship with the natural world. Women, often the backbone of food systems, and young people provide fresh hope, and this word hope is so important to me in the context of what we're going to be talking about today, for transformative food systems that bring us together as families, communities, and nations in harmony with nature. I don't want to belabor my opportunity and my little bit of the introduction today, except to say that we look forward to discussing the topic, and with that also the engagement and the questions that will follow, and also good luck and welcome to my fellow speakers and presenters today. With that, I'm going to stop for now, Desikan, and hand it over to you to continue for us.
Thank you very much, Janse, for that great introduction. Colleagues, that was Janse Rabi, who is from Agri-SA, but he's also a commissioner on the Presidential Climate Commission. And you would not be surprised to know that his portfolio inside the commission is to also organize himself around the thinking and our collective thinking around agriculture issues and food security issues in the wake of climate change. Welcome to all of you, and I see the numbers are jumping up as we go along, and I understand fully, I think we all do, the difficulties of load shedding and what that means around connectivity. Apologies for that. So we have some folks still trying to get on with some difficulty, but we'll work our way through that, as we must. So we have a fairly interesting lineup of speakers today from a diverse spectrum in the agriculture sector and beyond. And we have had on our registrations a wide variety of people who are interested in this conversation. So we're looking forward to a really good chat. Hopefully, we are going to converge on our understanding of both the solutions, well, first the problems and then the challenges, and then the solutions around how we can move forward towards a much more resilient agriculture sector in the country, as well as organizing for us to have some global leadership in the domain of climate smart agriculture. So, colleagues, without further ado, I want to invite immediately Professor Tafatswa Mabudi from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the International Institute for Water Management, IMI, and he will join us today, and he's going to offer us a framing presentation to help us to navigate our way into this discussion today. Tafatswa, welcome, and over to you.
Okay, thanks, Des. Let me just try to share my screen. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. Confirm if you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. My name is Tafatswa Mabudi. I lead IMI's Global Research Group on Sustainable and Resilient Food Systems, and I'm also an honorary professor with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I thought this was a good opportunity. I was just at the G20 early on this month, where I also presented on this topic. So I thought I would share some of the lessons coming out of the G20 summit with regards to climate resilient agriculture. So we all know that climate change is real. It is happening around us. I think if we had any doubts, the events that have happened in this last couple of years have really confirmed the urgency of climate change. In terms of agriculture, the primary risks in terms of reducing amount of arable land for food production, reduction in yield, flood losses, and of course limitations to irrigation expansion. And this is happening within a context where we know that food production has to almost double in order to meet the increasing demand. Yet the resource base for increasing this, food production, which is the land, the water, is dwindling in a sense. So there are two contrasting images there. In terms of how we look at it, I'm coming at it from a water perspective, because by and large, across most of sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa in particular, the greatest climate risks to agricultural production will be experienced through either decreasing rainfall or increasing rainfall variability. And of course, the increasing temperature will also have implications on the water availability in terms of evaporation and evapotranspiration. And we also want to look at it from a multiple scales perspective. That is, how then do we manage or build resilience within agriculture, starting from the field, which is basically your smallholder farmers, moving up to the watershed or landscape kind of level. And how also do we manage it across different temporal scales, from hourly up to the seasonal, and looking at long-term forecasts. And how within this context of having to adapt agriculture to climate change, do we then manage the fact that already we are faced with agriculture being the largest user of water? Globally, it is 70%. Locally in South Africa, the figure is about 62%. And with climate change and all the other pressures such as population growth, urbanization, land use change, that figure of 62% actually needs to decline. So how then do we manage to produce more with less water and with less land being available for food production? One of the things that I have learned over time, working on water and adapting agriculture to climate change, is the multidisciplinary nature of agriculture as we move from the singular and when we move across scales. So right from when we move from how do we manage a crop as a variety itself. How do we manage a farmer's field at a smallholder level? How do we manage it at a community level? And how we manage it at a system or landscape level requires different disciplines, and it requires different skills and expertise to be part of that conversation. And that's where I also applaud the PCC for convening this sort of dialogue that is bringing together those people with those different skills and expertise to contribute to this discussion. A major challenge that we have to address is, whilst there have been improvements in the technologies in terms of water use efficiency, the challenge is that we have not always then transferred the benefits back to the system. What I mean by this is, whilst farmers might experience improved water use efficiency and reduced water use at a farm or field level, they often do not then release the saved water back into the system. They usually then use the saved water to expand on their enterprise. So this is what we call apparent savings, because they are not real in that they are still kept within the same framework or the same use. They are not released to other uses. How do we move forward in terms of unlocking water management in agriculture under climate change? We have to understand the multidisciplinarity of the challenge. We have to understand that as we move across scales and disciplines, we have different actors with different objectives and competing agendas, and therefore with different incentives for coming to the party. And for that, we need to, come up with systems type of approaches that cut across scales and are also transdisciplinary in nature. And over the last couple of years, we have been working on promoting what we call the water energy food nexus approach, which is basically an integrated and transdisciplinary approach that seeks to manage water across different sectors and entities, but also restructure the traditional network of partnerships. The other thing that we need to also envision much better when we are looking at adapting to climate change and climate resilient agriculture, and as we move from the farmer's field up to national level, for say, is how do we envisage or how do we understand the productivity of water? We have often always understood the productivity of water from a physical perspective. That is the return per unit or the yield per unit of water that is utilized in agriculture. But as water becomes more scarce, we also need to understand that productivity from an economic perspective. What is the financial return per unit of water being utilized, and how do we maximize on that? At the same level, we have to understand that agriculture is not just there to provide food and calories, it is also there to provide nutrition and health. So how do we also understand the value of water from a nutrition and health perspective? So we have been looking at economic and nutritional water productivity, and again, looking at it from how do we maximize nutritional and economic water productivity. At the farmer's field, you'd be looking at increasing diversification, crop diversification, sustainable intensification. At the system level, again, you're looking at diversification, mixed farming systems, rotational systems. At a basin level, you are now more interested in the broader flows, and tools such as water accounting become critical at that level, so that you understand whether we are releasing water for environmental flows and how much is being retained for agricultural production. At the farm level, and in a country such as South Africa, we are also particularly interested in how do we manage rain-fed agriculture. By and large, the large proportion of agricultural production is done under rain-fed conditions and is therefore most vulnerable to climate change and variability. So already we have seen farmers struggling to cope with late onset of rainfall season, the variability during the season of rainfall, the increasing number of number of dry days or dry spells during the season, and the occurrence of those dry spells with critical growth stages. And farmers are not able to easily adapt or cope with that variability. And how do we then respond in those systems? And we have been looking at options such as soil and water conservation, integrated basin and storage management, rainwater harvesting, and also multiple use systems, recognizing that at the farm or household level, water is not just utilized for agriculture, it's also utilized for domestic, livestock, and other purposes. We have also been looking at irrigation transitions, because a major strategy that has been put forward, not just in South Africa, but at a regional level, is to increase the area under irrigation as part of climate change adaptation. Now, as we increase the area under irrigation, what sort of transitions are needed to really implement this? We have existing irrigation schemes, small, medium, and large. How do we modernize and revitalize them? What sort of innovations and technologies are needed, and how do we bundle the various solutions that are needed to de-risk agriculture in these areas? So we've been looking at various types of solutions, but mostly with a focus on bundled solutions, where we combine things such as improved seeds, improved agronomy, improved water management, access to markets, access to finance, and bring together a more integrated bundle that can support farmers at that level. It is not a one size fits all. So that banding also has to be regionally differentiated and contextualized so that it responds to the different needs of farmers across different agroecologies. We also need to focus on, the modernization and revitalization of irrigation schemes. There are a lot of irrigation schemes in South Africa that have not been performing very well, that have not delivered the expected return on investments. So before we expand into investing in new systems, we need to break the build, neglect, rehabilitate cycle. That is, we need to get those that are already there to be operational and productive. We need to look at how do we manage these assets sustainably, and how do we incentivize communities to take responsibility and ownership, and how do we bring on board the private sector to partner with government and communities to transform these systems and make them profitable. As we also envision and look at how do we have these transitions, as I mentioned, we have been looking at, water, energy, food nexus approach, and how integrated approaches can help us to bring about greater sustainability. So we have assessed different irrigation transition pathways from a water, energy, and food productivity perspective, and integrating across those spaces. And you'll see from the preliminary results that we have that when you look at things from a sector perspective, the picture is very different. So if you only prioritize water, the transitions that you come up with, or the choice of transition that you come up with, is very different from when you integrate both water, energy, and food, and then see what is the suitable transition. But by and large, low energy systems such as drip, that are also water use efficient and use least water, come across or come out on top. So we need to be transitioning into more energy efficient and water use efficient systems that also allow for maximizing on crop productivity. And within that context, the use of renewable energies in agriculture, such as solar-based irrigation, becomes topical and important in reducing the overall carbon footprint of agriculture. We have also been looking at smart agricultural water management, because one of the things that we need to shift is now managing demand and not just managing supply. So in the past, we have been focusing on managing supply. Now we want to focus on managing demand. and potentially reducing the non-beneficial or non-productive water losses, and then maximizing on the productive, consumption of water. And in this regard, it means deploying low-cost sensors. So we have been using things such as chameleon water sensors, wetting front detectors, and more recently, we have come into this space to also work with drone applications in agriculture, in particular for smallholder sectors, to try and improve water management at that scale of farming. In terms of equipping nations to effectively manage drought, we have talked in many instances about the need for early warning systems and agro advisories. So we have been working to develop drought monitoring systems. We recently launched one for Zambia, which is now operational in Zambia. The system has been already operational in several Asian countries, and we are hoping to expand its utility beyond just Zambia to other countries in the region, including South Africa. And what this basically allows us is to be able to forecast, monitor, and manage drought more effectively. There are similar tools as well for managing floods, and there are other hazards that again can be managed through improved early warning and forecasting. And this becomes very important in terms of how do we disseminate this information to farmers. A lot of what needs to be done is to build preparedness in farmers so that we don't always have to respond. So for example, this year, we already know that we are, in an El Nino season. So what are the seasonal forecasts? What is the frequency of monitoring? What is the frequency of the forecast? And are the forecasts matched to advisories so that farmers already know what sort of varieties they should be planting, when they should be planting, what management practices they should be putting in place, and also understanding the risks associated with producing during this El Nino season. So again, that calls for bundled innovations and solutions that are tailored for farmers at different scales. We have also been, piloting managed aquifer management, and this is very useful in terms of how do we manage, rainfall when we are having those flash floods, the excess rainfall that would be otherwise unproductive in an agricultural context. If we can use that water, if we can capture it and use it to recharge underground water, which we can then use or tap into during either the dry spells, the mid-season dry spells, or the dry season afterwards. So we have been piloting this in several countries in Africa and Asia, and it's a very sustainable solution to how we manage both extremes, the increased intensity of rainfall when it happens and the dry periods that can also happen within the same season. And as I mentioned earlier on, when we look at it, we also need to consider agriculture at a system level, and how can we better monitor the use of water? How can we better account for water transfers within the system so that, again, we manage water as a resource, not just for agriculture, but for different other uses. And we ensure that the benefits of improved water management within the agriculture space are being transferred into the other systems so that there is broader system sustainability at a larger scale. So we have developed some useful water accounting tools that we have deployed for that particular purpose. An important area where I think South Africa has been leading in terms of research is around the circular economy and how do we reuse water, wastewater reuse in agriculture. How do we also reuse the waste itself as an input in agriculture, manufacturing fertilizer, and using the water for irrigation and then the fertilizer. And I'm glad that South Africa has really pioneered a lot of research in this area, mostly supported through the Water Research Commission. And I think going into the future, in terms of the 4 pathways for managing water, which is rain-fed, smallholder irrigation, large-scale irrigation. The fourth is actually wastewater use in agriculture. And that is currently the most underutilized pathway, and it has the most significant potential for growth and expansion, especially under climate change. And again, it calls for public-private partnerships to really come in and invest in the technologies and commercialize some of the technologies that have already been piloted and deemed to be very successful. Another area which I mentioned earlier on is how do we link climate information services to informing the choice and appropriateness of climate-smart agricultural practices? I always say the agriculture only becomes climate smart when it is informed by climate. The practices have always existed. The good agricultural practices have always existed. But the smart part is when we can really link climate information to informing the choice and selection of these different practices, and also the location in terms of where do they get deployed. So we have various tools that we have been developing, and we are now working in terms of how do we link that climate information to providing contextualized and regionally differentiated advisories for farmers, again, moving from smallholder farmers up to the large-scale farmers. And this is just an example of what has been done so far in terms of linking climate information and services to climate smart agricultural practices, and how then when you do that, you come up with more contextualized combinations of practices that actually respond to the farmer's context in terms of the climate risks that they'll be facing. But we need to do more in this regard in terms of, merging the climate information services and bundling it with climate smart agricultural practices. And to conclude, some of the key points that I would want to make is climate change is real. We are already living through the climate crisis, and it calls for an immediate action. And it also calls for us to understand the systematic nature of how it works across different scales and across time. We need to invest in research and innovation to optimize water productivity in its multiple dimensions. So not just physical, but also economic and nutritional. We need to optimize system performance, and radical improvements are needed, especially in terms of how we improve and revitalize existing irrigation schemes. We need to manage climate risks, mostly through climate information, so that we build resilience. Thinking from a water, energy, food, environment nexus approach will allow us to understand trade-offs that can happen across different scales and systems, and therefore come up with solutions that are more robust and sustainable, and that mitigate maladaptation. We need to manage complexity, and we need to strengthen the governance and institutions within the country and the various platforms, so that they are better able to develop and to deploy the transformation and support the necessary transitions that are needed to adapt to climate change. With that, I bring my presentation to an end. Back to you, Des.
Thank you so much, Tafatswa. That was really, really excellent. And I'm not even going to attempt to pull out the key points because there have been so many. Suffice to say that you have emphasized the very broad spectrum of both sectors and issues that we have to engage to actually get into climate smart agriculture. Colleague, on that note, I want to move straight to the first panel, and we are privileged not only to have great panelists who will be introduced to you shortly, but we have a great moderator as well. We have the editor-in-chief of the Landbouw Weekblad and landbouw.com, and the Farmers Weekly is part of that stable, Chris Burgess, who is going to join us to moderate this first panel, unpacking that presentation and beyond around looking at the challenges and opportunities. Chris, welcome to you, and the panel is yours.
Thank you very much, Desigen. I want to just quickly kick off by just by way of introduction. So Landbouweekblad, I mean, Landbouweekblad and African Farming, our two Afrikaans and English brands that include magazines, TV shows, and so on. I mean, we've been involved in climate smart agriculture for 11, 12 years now, and we very heavily invested in the area. We host three of the three big regenerative farming conferences every year in South Africa. Farmers, obviously farmers attend those. We push the climate smart agenda through our African farmers days, where we pull about 400 emerging farmers. We're hosting the International Conservation Agriculture Conference next year in Cape Town, which brings the best minds in the industry from all over the world together. And then we work very closely with Conservation Agriculture Western Cape, which is a assortment of farmers here in the Western Cape that look specifically at conservation agriculture in cropping systems. The point I want to just make is that climate smart agriculture, what we have found is that it's actually the complete solution, and that it actually ticks all the boxes. So firstly, it's potentially very low tech because you use whatever you have. You use animals as implements, you use plants as your fertilizer. So it's relatively low tech. It's relatively low capital investment. As a matter of fact, you particularly want to move away from fertilizers and all sorts of high capital inputs. You're producing more nutrient-dense food. And we've actually done the tests on grass-fed beef. It's just more nutrient dense. And if one sort of considers the childhood malnutrition level in South Africa, I mean, this is a huge area of concern and a huge potential solution. You're using less inputs, like I mentioned, less fertilizer, and with more carbon in your soil. I was just listening to the previous presentation. As you build your carbon in your soil, you get better water infiltration, and you get a better water holding capacity. So climate smart agriculture, from our point of view, is the solution. It ticks all these various boxes on ecological level, climate level, agricultural production level, social level, and cohesion level. So farmers are already adapting all over South Africa, and this is often driven by economic considerations. Farmers are just realizing that in the Western Free State, for instance, you need to have your crop residues on your lands, otherwise your lands blow. If you believe in climate smart agriculture or not, that's what you need to do. Landbouweekblad itself is funding quite a bit of research in rates on ultra high density grazing. It's been amazing to see how these grasslands just bounce back. On the energy front, I mean, irrigation farmers and high value crop farmers in South Africa have been absolutely at the forefront of alternative energy installations. And then let's not forget for a minute that South Africa has some of the best adapted livestock genetics in the world. When it comes to climate change, I mean, if you think of your Nguni cattle, your Afrikaner cattle, I mean, these are the animals that we're going to have to be farming with in a changing climate. And then also on smallholder level, I mean, we work with Grain SA on smallholder research in KZN, and then we also do work with Shane Brody and them close to Queenstown, where they've put all the communal cattle herds and sheep herds into big herds that they do ultra high density grazing with. So that's just sort of by way of background what we're busy with, and sort of where I see it as far as agriculture is concerned. And you must excuse me, I work with farmers, so I'm trying to be practical about it and look at solutions that we can implement today, because farmers need the solutions today. As the previous speaker said, we're going into El Nino, so all the lessons that we've learned have to start kicking in straight away. So the panelists on the panel this morning, Dr. Noni Vutula from UCT, Janse Rabie from Agri SA, and Dr. Tandeka Basa from AFASA, the Farmer Association. Welcome to all of you. I just want to let me just start off by saying Dr. Vatula, UCT, I know you guys have done quite a bit of research. Dr. Peter Johnson is involved with you guys. How does the academia see the problem? How urgent is it? And what is the most pressing research that you guys are busy with?
Thank you, Chris, for giving me the opportunity, and thanks Des and Tim for the invitation to participate today. So the question is, how does the academia view this in terms of urgency? I think from the perspective of UCT, the impact of climate change on food systems and in agriculture as a whole is viewed as an urgent matter that needs urgent attention. And I think one of the options that has been practiced in South Africa and in Africa in general is climate smart agriculture. And on climate smart agriculture, I would like to pick up on a few things that we view as important. One of them is the coordination between the different sectors under agriculture: fisheries, livestock, forestry, and crop production. And one of the opportunities that are already available is the fact that farmers are already practicing, as mentioned by Chris already, that these are the things that farmers are already doing, but we need to upscale them in terms of the practices themselves, but also in terms of introducing the use of technology in farming. For an example, one of the speakers spoke about the use of the availability of information, climate information, but also the use of information technologies to make the farmers aware. So we know the challenges in South Africa, but in Africa in general, particularly in smallholder farming sector, that some of them are not educated. So we need to upscale the availability of extension officers to assist the farmers to upscale the uptake of the tools that are needed for climate smart agriculture. I would like to pause there.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And I mean, where I especially agreed with you is that a lot of what farmers are already doing is already climate smart, because farmers have to adapt as the climate changes. I mean, we've seen how the planting season in the summer rainfall regions has moved on with a month or two, and farmers have had to adapt. Janse, what is commercial or organized agriculture doing to take what Dr. Vatula and them are doing at UCT and to mainstream it in agriculture? I mean, is this an area of concern? I know you've especially been doing a lot of work on energy, but if you're looking at the whole package and you're looking at how to get agriculture, South African agriculture, more resilient, what are you guys doing, and what is your approach on getting this into the mainstream South African agricultural practices?
Yes, thanks for that. You know, climate smart agriculture is one of the ways in which agriculture needs to be smart. There are a number of ways, you know, that includes cash flow management. It includes the ability to be able to manage your energy resources effectively, considering the implications of load shedding that we have and face on a daily basis. It's fine in the sense that I think the commercial agricultural sector is well served with information and the ability to disseminate information. But we also realize that a commercial agricultural sector that has the true demographics that they have in South Africa is not going to be sustainable in the long run. We need to include and involve emerging Black farmers in our food security systems altogether. And that is going to require a significant mind shift from the commercial agricultural sector's side and point of view, in including bringing on board partnerships, incentivizing farmers, making sure that the information that is out there and available to ensure climate smart agriculture that includes food security and food affordability, in particular in the South African context of this day and age, to make sure that is brought in to ensure the long-term sustainability of the sector altogether. One thing I can say is that, and Chris, you know this very well, is that you don't need to tell farmers how to farm. they face the realities of climate change, droughts, wet seasons, dry seasons, fires, pests, disease, all kinds of things, logistical challenges that we're experiencing, not only with electricity, but also with transport and transport systems. They face that on a daily basis with very little support from government. And that creates an enormous resilience for those that have been on their feet and are able to adapt and to change. But it also creates enormous challenges for those that are really struggling to get onto their feet. And that is where we need to focus a lot of our energy and our effort, I think, in this stage, not only in South Africa, but also in the region as a whole. It's very tough for any new entrant into the agricultural sector, especially for those entrants that are resource constrained and that don't have the ability and that don't have the opportunities necessarily to avail themselves of the opportunities that the commercial agricultural sector has been benefiting from for a very long time. I do applaud especially the efforts from Landbou Weekblad and from the things that you're in particularly involved with, but that needs to also reach and meet more people's needs on the ground. This is a lived experience. It is something that needs to be, the assistance that is out there needs to be accessible to all. And again, the work that you're doing is excellent, but it needs to be rolled out a little bit more because, as I said, this is a practical, very real, very lived experience for all farmers emerging and commercial at the same time.
Jans, I couldn't agree with you more. We find it with our African farming days where it's always difficult. I mean, I don't like speaking about emerging farmers because a lot of the black farmers I know are very, very commercial operators now, farm on a very high level. But the African farming days that we host, we pull about between 300 and 400 farmers. And I often think, a person actually needs a climate smart checklist. You start off with, what animals are you farming with? I mean, are they adapted for your area? What are the things that you should be looking at as you start out with farming? And Dr. Mabasa, now I want to just come to you and just hear from you. You represent this black agriculture, call it what you will, our emerging sector. A lot of really solid farmers. What are the unique challenges that this sector faces that the commercial sector maybe doesn't always appreciate? Do we have? So I want to make sure, do we have Dr. Thandeka on?
Has dropped off. She was just here a minute ago.
Has dropped off. Good. All right. Then let me get back to Dr. Vutela and Janse Rabie. Maybe, a person speaks about climate smart agriculture. I mean, what does it actually mean? In a nutshell, Janse Rabie, I see you took it quite wide to include financing and logistics and so on. Dr. Vutela, you in a more academic, you've got a more academic perspective on it. I mean, in a sentence, if a farmer came to you and you had to sell the idea to them, I mean, what are we talking about here?
If I may start, Chris, climate smart agriculture is an approach to guide all the needed changes in the agricultural system for food security purposes and climate change. So it's a combination of approaches, but mindful of the negative impact of farming and trying to reduce that negative impact of farming on the climate change.
So from academia, I mean, what are the main things that we should be worrying about as farmers? How is the climate? What are the 2 or 3 big things that are going to change with the climate that farmers have to be worried about? If I could just hang on with you for a minute there, Dr. Vutela.
I think one of the things that is of concern is the fact that with the changes in climate change and the weather conditions, the temperatures are fluctuating. So the seasons themselves are changing. What we used to typically farm as a winter crop may not necessarily fall under the winter crop presently, but also due to the changes, harsh weather conditions, the land that is available for farming is now shrinking. So the methods that we need to use have to be adaptive to those changes that I have mentioned.
Janse Rabie, as just a closing comment from you, what is the message that you are putting out there in primary agriculture? What's the message that's going to farmers? What do they need to be worried about, and what do they need to change?
Chris, this is a multifaceted question. I mean, you can be very academic about it, but essentially what one shouldn't leave out of the equation or out of the discussion is the severe rise in input costs that are also driving efforts to change to more sustainable, more economically viable, and more environmentally friendly ways of farming to ensure food security and the ability for nations to feed their populations in a manner that is affordable. And this issue about affordability is one that is critically important in South Africa at the moment. Yeah, we see all of us see rising food prices all the time. And that is a crucial element of food security that, and sorry for belaboring the point on this, but if you talk about food security in South Africa, and we very often have a happy message about that, but if you have a population of which at least nearly a third of our population is struggling to put food on the table, then you need to be very sensitive about what you say about food security. I think one of the, just on your, just as a final thought, perhaps, I mean, there's a lot of things about climate smart agriculture and related terms like conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, that more or less say the same thing. But as a last thought, I think the aim of climate smart agriculture is to achieve a triple win of increased productivity, enhanced resilience, and reduced emissions at the same time. These are not only domestic or regional challenges. These are global challenges that need to be addressed. We see that, and I recently listened to this speech by the United Nations in their food summit that took place. There are severe weaknesses. There's something wrong sometimes, very often, with our food production systems and our food supply systems that we need to take account of, not only domestically, as I said, but also in a global context.
Janse Rabie, thank you very much. A very interesting point that you made. Last year, we brought out Rick Clark, American farmer from Indiana. He uses no fertilizer, uses no chemicals. Has cut out 48 million rand out of his annual farming budget, and he gets higher than average yields on his crops. And when he finished his talk, all the farmers stood up and gave him a standing ovation. I've never seen that in my life. So there are guys that are getting it right. I think we're a lot further down the road than we realize. Thank you all terribly for your inputs. Dr. Vutula, you are with me down in Cape Town on a very cold and rainy day down here in Cape Town. Stay warm. Janse Rabie, thank you very much for your inputs. And with that, I hand back to the program director.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, panel. Unfortunately, Thandeka was bumped out by her connectivity issues, and when she manages to return, we will create a space for her to offer a really important perspective from a part of organized agriculture that is critical to this debate, and as you have phrased it very well inside this panel. Colleagues, I think we will open now very briefly for some inputs. We're going to have a very vibrant Q&A and general discussion session closer to the end, but we have closed one part of this discussion. And before we talk in much more detail about the solutions in the next panel, let's open the floor for those who want it. So please indicate using your raise hand function wherever you find it on your screen. And as soon as we see you, we will call you out. So I can only see the panelists from where I am. So Ntabe is saying, I'm going to please rely on you to be able to point out people that are beyond this screen as well. Thank you. Keith Middleton, I see you. Please take the floor.
Good morning, colleagues. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I just, if you may, I did raise my hand, and I don't think I could have been part of the panel discussion, but I was going to, because Tandega wasn't available, I was going to answer the questions faced by the emerging sector. Is that okay? Can I?
Yes,
Can I just
please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thanks, colleagues, for inviting us to this important and discussion. I think it's well overdue because climate change is actually on top of us right now. And we all, in a sense, scrambling around in order to mitigate against climate change. However, the emerging sector, I think the question was asked, what doesn't the commercial sector appreciate about the emerging sector? The emerging sector, and now we do understand that amongst us are Black commercial farmers. Notwithstanding that, the majority of emerging farmers are small-scale farmers, and which are mainly non-sustainable and non-profitable, but more seen as what we call survivalist farmers, and largely due to the following reasons. Access to irrigable land, access to adequate water, and access to proper markets, as well as access to finance. And then what we do have, we have government support, which is sporadic and sometimes certainly non-helpful in a sense, because it's what we call piecemeal funding that comes through. This department would come and give you a few things, and that department will come and give you a few things, all not at the same time. And so it actually takes us back as the emerging sector. Then, even the partnerships we talk about between the commercial sector and the emerging sector are fraught with mistrust and irregularities in terms of a benefit that should go to the emerging sector. So we actually, as the emerging sector, are really dealing with lots on our table. And then on top of it, there's the climate change that we need to deal with. So these are some of the challenges we are facing as the emerging sector that I just wanted to highlight, colleagues. But if Tandega comes, then maybe she could expand on that. But that's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. The other hand I see is Gugu Mashlangu from the ARC. Gugu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. However, not from the ARC. I am just I'm just a farmer. I'm an aquaponics farmer based in my hometown in Midbank. So lovely discussions on the panel. I think everybody's insights are very important. But when it comes to speaking on the climate awareness, I've noted that the panels have acknowledged that the farmers are well aware on climate change and the tools that are needed for them to in fact become climate ready. So I guess just an encouragement for us to start speaking practicality about these important issues, because the climate change in South Africa involves implementing these practices that it seems are only available for the commercial sector because of the availability or because of the tests and the trials of all these new technology that they can seemingly afford. So I just wanted to encourage everybody here to start speaking on climate smart agriculture solutions. When you speak about that, it's looking into your drought resistant crops we need to start speaking about the water management practices and be encouraging farmers to be using like drip irrigation, rainwater harvesting, crop rotation, diversification, soil conservation, and all these practices that are important. But I think we need to kind of dovetail it to an actual practical solution. What does that mean if you use, you know, disease-resistant crops? What happens when you start switching to solar pumps, for instance? I think we need to start speaking more about the practicality of it. What are the benefits? Most of these farmers don't even know how to calculate a climate impact. So we really need to take it back to basically understanding that these practices are benefiting the planet, but how? So just more practical solutions. I think we all know that we need to be doing crop rotations. That has been said to us a dozen times, but we need to now know how to measure climate impact so that we can be on the forefront. Because when you look at European countries, most of them have weather boxes. It's a standard. So I'm not hearing encouragement on African farmers particularly to be looking at climate smart solutions, and this is what it means, and this is what they need to start getting on their farms so that they can become climate ready. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gugu. We'll take the one other hand that's there before we move on with the program. Lindy Nzwana, you have the floor. So Lindy, we're not hearing you. Okay, colleagues, we're going to move on then. So with your permission, we're going to go into the next panel. And the next panel is going to engage the issue, harvesting what has come out of the opening presentation, the really good panel that we had just now, as well as the inputs from the floor, and talk about what are the elements of the solution tree to reach the CSA that we're looking for. And as Chris Burgess pointed out, climate smart agriculture is in fact going to be good for climate smart activity in the world towards a low carbon economy, but it also has the opportunity to address many of the current ails in the agriculture sector as a whole, even beyond the climate issues. So I want to invite our panel, which will be Sylvester Mpendeli from the Water Research Commission in South Africa, Professor Lisa Korsten from the University of Pretoria, and we're going to invite back Tafatswa Mabudi to join this panel as well. Sylvester, over to you first. You heard the problematique that Tafatswa put out, as well as the other comments. What is the right way to pull all of this thing together? Are there any elements that we're still missing, and how would we solve those gaps?
Good morning, Des again, and colleagues. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts. Firstly, let me appreciate the fact that Presidential Climate Commission organized this. From WRC, from Water Research Commission perspective, climate smart agriculture is the way to go. This is based on the fact that it assists us to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and it also assists us to build strong adaptive capacity and resilience. And over and above that, we have developed various technologies as a knowledge generation organization. And I do believe that whatever technologies that we have developed, such kind of technology needs to assist smallholder farmers in order to improve their livelihood. The technology needs to assist farmers to obtain high yields. And such technology needs to assist commercial farmers to be able to earn foreign currency, and also making sure that they use water in a very effective and efficient manner. One thing that we also need to factor as part of this is to make sure that the South African Climate Smart Agriculture Strategic Framework needs to be implemented. And this could be done through by addressing the science policy interface. And the presentation by Professor Mabaudi spotted it correctly. There are various strategic interventions that were done, and I do believe that it is the right time now to start implementing some of the solutions that he has highlighted. I'm glad that there's a strong buy-in from sectors, and what we need to do is to move away from theory to practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvester. Let's move straight on to Lisa. Professor Lisa Corsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Disanen. Nice to be part of this group. I think the message in the first very good presentation, it was really brilliant, was pretty clear. We need immediate action. We need to go beyond talking, and we need an action plan. But the action plan needs to be all-inclusive. You know, I was just reading the chat on the sideline and just looking at the wealth of expertise we have in this country and the number of people working on different aspects of climate smart agriculture. But they're not linked into a network. So maybe that's our first big task, and maybe that can be our outcomes of today. The who's doing what, and how can we transform our agri-food system to the benefit of all. We cannot leave a single farmer behind. And we know that. We have to action it. We have to have a strategy on the table, how we're going to not only change the perception of agriculture in the public domain, but get the farmers, the agricultural sector to work together. They need to be a close-knit sector because they all have challenges. It's the scale of these challenges that differ. Whether you are a big commercial farmer or a small farmer, if there's a big runaway fire, it's going to destroy all of you. So we need to think outside the box, and the time is now. We don't have any more time. It has to be inclusive. And we are working towards a just transition. And I think it's very important that we make sure that we link agriculture and food. At the end of the day, it's about food. And often when we talk to farmers, they don't really have the vision of who is the person who's buying my food. Who likes to eat this product that I grow with so much effort and dedication. Because producing food is halfway. We still have to distribute, prepare, serve, and consume the food. So I want to almost turn the story upside down and say, let's start with a plate of food. Because the majority of people in South Africa at a household level is still food insecure. They don't even have that plate of food. So we need to look at the right to food for everyone. The appreciation of the food journey from the farm, if the community and society better support farmers, and there's a better perception and a better trust, we will already have solved a tenth of this journey from the farm to the table. And then we need to look at what should be on the plate. What should we really be producing? Should we be producing certain crops or products, food products, only for export, but we are not feeding our own people? So we need to get that balance, because there's almost a dysfunctional pathway in South Africa between the highly organized, excellent commercial industry that's exporting, competing internationally, and able to move our food products of high quality and safety standards across miles, and it's essential, but we need to look at that same food distribution within our communities. So we need to have this dual system of support and trust, and we have to build this network. So it is one world. The time is now, and we have to make sure that what's on the plate is nutritious and safe, and we need to unpack it, because food security is about access, affordability, and food choices. We have a lot of discussion around indigenous foods, but do the young people still know how to prepare an indigenous food or how to make a nice healthy meal. They want fast foods. How do we get people back to understand what is a proper portion of food? Because we are wasting food all the way. So we can produce more, but we must waste less from the farm all the way to the plate. And if we have a portions of food that's more than what your body needs, that's part of food waste. Those are the discussions we should start putting on the table, because it's all linked to agriculture, smart agriculture. And I want to say smart food and smart food consumption. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. We're going to come back to some of those issues that you raised because they're worth exploring. I'm going to go to Tafatswa, but I also want to alert in advance Sneh Ngadi from the Women's Desk of the KZN AFASA. We would like you to come in as well just now. But Tafatswa, I mean, the framing that you put at the beginning is clearly appreciated. Now let's talk about those elements of solution. I mean, you put up a really interesting slide talking about the 5 different kinds of smarts you need around engaging this and moving forward. There's been a lot of discussion around one of those smarts being in big deficit, and that's around knowledge. We're talking about dual systems, 2-tier systems, this artificial separation of the farming community in South Africa and globally. I wonder if you can offer us some pearls of wisdom as to how we build those bridges in a sustainable way. Tafatswa.
Thank you very much, Des, and I've really enjoyed listening to the follow-up discussions. We do have a dualistic system of agriculture in South Africa and pretty much across much of the region, where we've got our smallholder and emerging farmers on the one hand, and our large-scale and commercial farmers on the other hand. I think the emphasis should be on appropriateness of technologies for the different scales, because depending on the scale of production, the technologies that would be appropriate would be different. So you see in one slide, I was showing examples of technologies such as the chameleon water sensor and the wetting front detectors, which can be deployed at a small scale for irrigation scheduling for farmers. That would not apply on a large, commercial farm. You'd need different types of technologies to do the same thing, and the cost would also vary. We also need to make agriculture smart, even for smallholder farmers. And we have been working with the Water Research Commission to implement drone technologies for smallholder farmers for things such as irrigation scheduling, crop yield forecasting, crop health monitoring at that scale of production as well. Gugu spoke about, climate and weather information, and it is a key area that we need to improve in terms of increasing access to weather and climate information services, in particular for smallholder and emerging farmers. It might not mean each one of them having their own weather station because of the cost involved, but it's, we've got a national weather service that can produce that data. It just needs to be packaged appropriately and disseminated through relevant channels, contextualized to the farmers in terms of even the language, getting the language correct, so that farmers can access this information at that level. And then we also need to capacitate the extension services who interface with farmers so that they're able to then provide the necessary advisories, that is the translation of the climate information and matching it with the right practices. In terms of the diversification of agriculture, we've done a lot of work around looking at the role of agrobiodiversity, particularly underutilized indigenous and traditional crops that could be brought in to diversify farming systems, especially in rural areas, and address gaps in nutrition, things such as soil health, and more environmentally sustainable types of agriculture. And there's a lot of scope in terms of developing those crops and ensuring that they are deployed accurately and supported also in terms of, creating markets for them and incentivizing demand and consumption. I was in India just the other week, and they've got a whole dedicated institute for millets, where they're just doing research on millets and they're doing product development. They've got an incubator just for millets, and they've managed to mainstream millets into their national diets, incentivize the consumption, and through incentivizing and increasing consumption, it has created demand for millets production in their country. And that demand is being met by mostly smallholder farmers. There's nothing that stops us in South Africa from, we talk about south to south learning. There's nothing that stops us from implementing similar approaches and also incentivizing a range of other crops that, we've got locally. It's not just millets that we have. We've got legumes, we've got leafy vegetables that we can also incentivize. Lastly, we must understand that climate change on its own is very complex and multidisciplinary. So it's not just about production, it's not just about technology. There's also the social, there's the environmental, there's the health dimension. So it requires systematic approaches that bring on board all these various disciplines, the different actors, not just from research and academia, but particularly from government and industry, as well as civil society, so that we come up with solutions that are balanced. We come up with solutions that are appropriate to the challenges that people are facing where they are, and we come up with solutions that are practical and implementable within the environments that we want to deploy them. Thanks, Des.
Professor, that was really brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Ms. Ngadi, can I now bring you in, please?
Good morning, everyone. Please excuse the background noise. I'm currently on site. With me, I hear everyone's suggestion, but I feel like we still have a missing link, of which even today's agriculture sector is not covering for us as Black farmers. And that missing link is the insurance part. Yes, a lot of Black farmers, yes, we use organic fertilizers. We use them on our crops, and we try to diversify and introduce agroecological systems within our farms. But the problem is that what happens when there's a flood and all my chickens die and I don't have fertilizer anymore for my crops? So I think the main issue and the main sector we need to start bringing forward in the agriculture sector is the insurance. We need insurance for our crops. We need insurance for our livestock. But not only that, everyone is talking about these smart technologies, but who covers that? There are Black farmers that have received free JoJo tanks from municipalities or the departments. But when that JoJo tank is damaged and old, they don't have the finances to purchase a new one. And I feel like that's where the gap is. And that's how we're going to try and if we were to sort the insurance parts, especially for emerging farmers and small scale farmers, it will really help in bridging this gap between the commercial and the small farmers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. That's a very, very important input. Let me come back to you, Sylvester. You talked about the science policy interface. Of course, it needs to go beyond that science policy to practice. What are the ways that we can practically accelerate this? Because it's an ongoing problem where you have a science community that's sitting on an incredible repository of knowledge, and there's a dire need in the industry.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Des. Firstly, what we need to do is to change the way we are doing business. We cannot continue with the business as usual scenario or approach. And the second issue is to make sure that the science community need to work together with policymakers or policy implementers, so that whatever knowledge that we are generating, that knowledge will be translated into policies, strategies, plans, act, and so on. And over and above that, we have got the responsibility to make sure that, I mean, our research and development and innovation, it's really addressing issues on the ground. And I'm happy that there are various plans and strategies that have been developed by several government departments, including Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. But what we need to do is to harmonize and make sure that we create trade-offs among those government departments. And if we are talking about, let's say, maybe food security issues, we need to harmonize our activities. Social development needs to come on board, health, agriculture, and so on, so that at the end of the day, we'll minimize duplication and making sure that, I mean, there's synergies like Tafazo has highlighted during his presentation. The trade-offs and synergies and harmonization of activities are very, very, very important. And we need to provide more evidence. You know very well, we have been pushing very hard as Water Research Commission with regards to water, energy, food nexus, nutrition and health. And we are still pushing on that so that at the end of the day, we will be able to provide more evidence. But over and above that, we need to link our activities with national development plans and also sustainable development goals. You know, I mean, that's when you were still WRS, we spoke about organizing a national, I mean, symposium on water, energy, food nexus, so that we make an assessment about the progress with regards to the NDP and the SDG targets. And we are still planning to derive that next year, so that, I mean, where there are gaps, we need to address that. But I wanted to touch on one thing that was highlighted by Tafazo during his presentation, the irrigation transition. This is very, very important, considering the fact that, I mean, the intensity and the frequency that we are experiencing amongst the various climate sensitive sectors. We have got no choice but to make sure that, I mean, we embrace smart technology that's going to assist us to address food security issues. We need to make sure that we take care of our smallholder farmers, considering the fact that majority of them are vulnerable. They've got limited, I mean, financial resources, and majority of them, they also struggle to access technology. Issues related to early warning system. We need to jack up our system in order for us to minimize risk. And you know, agriculture is a risk business. You cannot wait for 3 months to take strategic decision. And these are issues that we need to push very hard with our key strategic partners, including universities, science councils, and NGOs. Over and above that, we also need to benchmark against what is happening at a global level, so that we benchmark our activity. And the fact that South Africa forms part of the global community, we've got the responsibility to make sure that we derive our activities in a nexus or in an integrated manner. Thank you, Des.
Thank you so much, Sylvester. Lisa, we're going to give you the last word on the panel before we move on into the Q&A. In your first input, you talked about the dichotomies in the system, and they're very real. And we've actually known about them for a long time. How do we bring these together to cement the right kind of conversation? Because on the one hand, you do want to maintain an international competitiveness. It does bring revenue into the system, but you can't do it at the expense of your own national food sovereignty. How do you navigate that pathway?
Yeah, I think it's essential that we link the two. The how to do it's a different story. I was thinking of adopting a community or a regional approach. You have often these big commercial farming families, and we know there's one very well-known one in the north, tomato production. And you know, to me, it's almost community farming or regional farming. They, you know, leaving no one behind, take a conglomerate of farmers and work together. If you look at Global Gap, when they originally developed it, it was for commercial farming. It is costly to get certified. And often your smaller farmers, particularly in Kenya, the model they used in Kenya was to have about 1,000 or 3,000 smaller scale farmers linked to one big commercial farm, and then they jointly get certified. on its own, it's got its own unique complexity and challenges and risks that you need to manage. But the concept was a regional approach and get that whole region to jointly then enter the export market. It's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. But we must link. And this is essential for our own survival. We need to make sure our community is not hungry. Our farm workers are not hungry. Because then we cannot justify sustaining these high-level commercial farming systems if we cannot even look after our own families. So that to me is a non-negotiable. But it's not only about the farming system. If we look at the whole food system, you look at the formal, highly regulated or self-regulated commercial sector. I'm talking about the retail, I'm talking about the fresh produce markets, the processors, and then you suddenly have a totally informal, unregulated sector where food is moved around. We have no control over the safety of it, quite often counterfeit food. There is no control in that system. Those food are usually sold on the streets. And it's interestingly enough, those food are not necessarily less safe than food in a formal system. And the reason is because the food chain is shorter. The food gets moved into that system and it's immediately consumed. It's not kept for tomorrow. There's no leftovers. So the two systems are so separate, but we need to find a fit for purpose, better system for the informal sector to ensure the food is safe and it's of quality, and that the food can move through a more equitable system. So that's one part of it. And we need to maybe look at incubators. And very importantly, I want to end and maybe just say as a last important point is we really need to fund transdisciplinary programs. And we need to really almost force scientists and research hubs to work together and create these incubators. And most importantly, I want to use an example. There's a brilliant book just published by Prof. Sale. It's called Stand Up for Science. So I want to put the challenge out. Let's stand up for agriculture.
Excellent. Excellent. Colleagues, we must say thank you to a really wonderful panel and also an impromptu panelist. I want to do two things now. Firstly, to offer an apology from the chair of the Resilience and Adaptation Working Group of the PCC, Commissioner Makoma Lakalakala. Her connection is really bad today, so she is listening in as best she can. She was going to do all of the Q&A sessions today, but we will take up this discussion further inside the PCC. And the second is now to hand over the person that's going to fill in for her, and that's Janse Rabie, and you've been introduced to him before. And he's going to now manage the Q&A session before we have a small closing right at the end. Janse, all yours.
Thank you, Desikan. I was really looking forward to listening to Makoma. She's one of my personal heroes. But I hope to stand in. Makoma, if you do manage to establish or re-establish your connectivity, please feel free to step in as well. Colleagues, we attendees this morning, we have an open session now, in addition to obviously the presentations that were made or the submissions made by the panel before. So we do have an opportunity for questions now in the broader sense. Lindy, I'm so glad you're back. I do see your hand up, and I was hoping to get back to you. You had an important question to raise. Now I hand over to you to raise that question now. Lindy Nzwana.
Hello, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindy Nzwana from Grassroots for Climate Action, and also I'm a smallholder farmer. I've heard all the presentations that's been made today, and it really bothers me when we talk about climate smart agriculture, because as a small scale farmer, I feel like the term itself has been misinterpreted or misdirected. Because if we're going to talk about climate smart agriculture in South Africa, when we have genetically modified seeds roaming around South Africa, and then I feel like we're not moving ahead. because as a small scale farmer, I practice organic farming. But where do I get my seeds? Because wherever I go is it's genetically modified seeds. And for me, I feel like we are not doing enough as South Africans, especially when we talk about climate smart agriculture. We need to have practical solutions in terms of just transition so that farmers can also be able to source out those organic seeds. When you go to shop, all the wholesalers, you cannot even save those seeds because they are genetically modified, and it becomes a loss to us as farmers because we practice seed saving, but when we save for the other season, those seeds are not even growing. So I feel disappointed, really. And if it's possible, I think we should promote more of organic seeds. Wholesalers should have all those things than having genetically modified seeds everywhere. So for me, I really don't get into the climate smart agriculture until we have all that. If we can address that issue, and then we'll be talking about climate smart agriculture. Until then, we don't have climate smart agriculture in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindy. That is an important point. On the one hand, genetically modified organisms have the opportunity or present an opportunity to provide more drought resilient or more pest resilient cultivars of staple foods. But if they're not accessible to small scale emerging black farmers in South Africa, how are you effectively talking about climate smart agriculture for all?
Yes.
I think that's what you touch on. So thank you for that comment and most appreciated. I want to get back to that and maybe refer to Lisa Corsten about this specifically and about the recent United Nations reports that's saying our food systems are failing us. Before I get to Lisa though, Chris, your hand's been up for quite a while. Please go ahead with your question. Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had my hand up in the panel discussion. I apologize for that. Just a few remarks. I love it that that Des got farmers on here because it's such practical concerns. I mean, the issue about seeds that has just been raised. I mean, we know down here in the Western Cape, for instance, how farmers have struggled to get the right canola cultivar. So seeds, absolute practical issue specifically for organic farmers. I mean, where you get your seeds. Do sort of a bit of farming on the side, so I know that is the issue. And then the insurance issue, absolutely. I mean, South Africa is one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have a subsidized crop insurance scheme, and I know Janse, you guys at Agri SA have been fighting quite hard for that. So that's all very practical concerns. The local crops, the previous speaker couldn't agree more with you. The Australians have just commercialized a legume you find on here in the Western Cape as a fodder crop in Australia. It's amazing. They're using it now as a farming crop. There's obviously questions about our IP. How did that happen? But absolutely, there's so many local crops that we could be looking at. Obviously, you need a market to grow them, but I mean, if you're feeding them to animals, your eventual product is meat, so it doesn't really matter. And then our animals, our adapted genetics that we have in this country, from small stock, fat-tailed sheep through to cattle, chickens. I mean, we've got. The rest of the world sort of looks at our animals. If you look at how Duni Merinos are of the adoption rates in Australia, there's a huge international demand for our animals because people realize that these are genetics that are climate smart. The ZZ2 example that was made, very interesting example because that is actually a smallholder model. Tommy van Zyl actually explained to me once, the CEO of ZZ2, they've actually figured out how much hectareage one farmer can manage of tomatoes. And basically their model is a whole lot of small guys that work almost independently, and all the services are then centralized, all your central services like finance. And then that whole issue of the local fresh produce markets that they've managed to erect in their production areas, where where there was nothing within 2-3 years, they were having a turnover of over 100 million rand. In terms of cooperation between the commercial and the emerging sector, I mean, we've got some wonderful examples. Witzenberg Pulse is just one that springs to mind up here in Ceres, where you've got big commercial export farmers linking up with emerging guys. But this just brings me to the last point that I want to make is like, what's the next step from here? And I mean, listening to all of this, I think one underestimates the solutions that are already out there, that have already been discovered, be it academia, but especially among farmers, because farmers don't have the luxury of not coming up with a solution. I mean, the seasons roll by, they have to solve it. So our experience working with farmer study groups like the Rimland Study Group or the Ottosdal No-Till Club, with all the farmer groupings down in the Western Cape, farmers have come up with some extraordinary solutions. And my suggestion would be that where I see all of this going is one needs to establish an advisory service. One needs to go and find all the best examples that address the most pressing problems, and you need to put it in one central place where people can get hold of it. You need to have a function where people can ask questions. So that sort of suggests it would be almost digital, but you need to get all the stuff at one place where people can access it. I remember when my dad was farming, he had the old agricultural handbook from 1960, which he used until his dying day. I mean, that was his go-to information about farming, because it contained everything. And I think that's what we're missing here. One place where we can store all this information that people can access it. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for that. You know, that is so practical and so solutions driven, and really brings it back to the climate smart agricultural dialogue that we're talking about now, and the role of organizations or institutions such as the Presidential Climate Commission in disseminating and improving the flow of information on that. Clement, I did see your hand. I'm going to give you an opportunity now. I want to return to a question that irked me in preparing for today's session. And it arose from a document that was published by the United Nations Environmental Programme about food systems that are failing humanity. And it lists a whole thing, well, 9 reasons or 9 examples in which our food system seems to be failing humanity altogether. Lisa, I'd like to get back to you. And I want to talk about how the introduction of climate smart agriculture could address this statement that is made. It's been adopted in various instances locally as well as internationally, about how climate smart agriculture can address these structural flaws that have been pointed out, and most of them are certainly valid. The point, and the one important one that I can't get my head around, is this notion as a global trend that food systems entrench inequality. We know that small farms make up the vast majority of all farms, 72%, but that they occupy only about 8% of all agricultural land, while 1% of the world's farms, and those are the large farms, occupy 65% of agricultural land. I want to ask you the question, Lisa, how does bringing the climate smart agricultural approach or lens offer possibilities to address these flaws in our food supply systems, if there is such an answer? I know it's a mouthful and a difficult question, but you seem, the best place to provide us with some sort of guidance on this. Over to you.
Yes. First of all, I want to unpack the statement about the food system is failing. I also want to link it with the brilliant presentation from Jack Zandstrom around the tipping points, the global tipping points, and the statement around day zero. And I almost feel that there's also a day zero for food, food zero. How close are we to a point in time where we will not have food in that food system and the food network? So that's why the question is really, is the food system adequate to supply food to all, given the climate change impact we're facing, and what can we do to circumvent that, and what plan of action should we have? I want to start by saying linking farmers to markets. We often speak about using smart agriculture using microchips, for instance, and microsensors. We've developed a model where we use 3D printed fruit. We've used avocado and tomato, and we followed it from the point of harvest all the way to the market. So we could actually in real time monitor handling, vibration impact, temperature change, even ethanol, CO2 change in composition in that airspace. We could see how the fruit was literally moving, temperature, everything. So we could intervene, or you almost empower the farmer to make the decision in terms of where he's moving his fruit. Maybe there's a disruption like during the COVID period or during the Ukrainian war, where a rapid decision needs to be made in terms of moving food. During COVID, we found that South Africa dealt with the food situation. I thought we were in a better position because we had enough food in the pantry. We had food in the field. We still had food on the trees, fruit on the trees. And our farmers jumped in and started moving food to the communities. We had disruptions at ports. And then obviously globally in that longer food system, we couldn't move food into our traditional markets because a lot of ports were closed, either because of the war or during the COVID period. So we need to think smarter of our food systems. We need to think of maybe different ways of moving it, different ways of monitoring it, and be in control of the food and take responsibility for our food, everyone in that supply chain, from the farmer, from the gate, from the distributors, or the retailers that move it to central distribution points, and from there they move it to different retail stores. We need to rethink that. Because the food system as it is failing us. We are not getting food to all the points that we need globally. That's what we know. So I think it's important that we address the food journey. In Italy, for instance, there's a culture built up around regional food, popularizing slow food, food that's locally produced, and there's value in that. But at the same time, you need that economy of scales. You need to move bulk food also, so it's trade-offs. And very importantly, I want to highlight the point of forming these associations, trade groupings. We have a very effective Fresh Produce Exporters Forum. We have very effective growers associations. They do the trade negotiations. They have these study groups. They share the information. But we don't have a fresh vegetable producers organization. For instance, we have the tomato producers organization. So we need to make sure that we have representation for all the different production systems so that we can take the interest of the farmers, but all the traders and suppliers and processors, they need to sit around the table and see how can we ensure that the food system will not continue to fail us. We need a different lens and we need a different food future. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Lisa, thanks so much for that. We have about 8 minutes left before closing time. Clement, you had your hand up for quite a while. Over to you.
Oh, thanks. Am I audible enough? Okay.
You are. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to raise this point because, as we know, this climate smart agriculture, it is an approach that helps us to get the action that needed to transform. We need to transform and we need to mitigate and adapt as it affects our climate change, because most of the livestock industries, they use more emissions and they use more fossil fuel to contribute in this agriculture. But to achieve the climate smart agriculture, we have to change our system and our actions so that we know that the technologies and the policies and the institutions and the investments that we use will be approachable and will also cover the poor, because most of the agriculture stuff is for export, as Lisa said. they need it for export. But our local produce and our local farmers, small scale farmers are in trouble because now we have we need to heighten attention all the policy processes, because now we need to also strengthen our national and local institutions. Like when Lisa said, the overseas companies is for export. But for us now, we need food security, and without strong adaptation measures and finance support, we won't achieve the climate smart agriculture. And also, we need to change our food habits. We have to change to also the greens, because most of the meat, where we consume a lot of meat, and a lot of meat, which means it's a lot of fossil fuel. That's what I want to raise, because for the most of the time, our biomass burning, our rice production and manure management produce a lot of greenhouse gases. That's why I say we have to change and adapt and mitigate all our policies through the food system and through the climate smart agriculture that we want to achieve as the approach that will help us to get the action that we need to transform. Thanks.
Thank you, Clement, for that. You know, with the Presidential Climate Commission, when I was appointed, most of the talk and discussions were about the just energy transition. And I do think that the opportunities that we do have with the Presidential Climate Commission is that we also perhaps need to consider a just food production transition in South Africa, which couples and ties in very nicely with the climate change discussions altogether. Keith Middleton, your hand's up. I'll give you an opportunity to raise your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi. You know, what I'm seeing here is lots of information, which is very smart. But what I see practically, you know, there's a saying that, you know, talk is cheap. We can all talk, but money buys the whiskey. At the end of the day, if we're not able to implement what our research is telling us and what we need to do, but also how we work together as farmers, and how and what do we do to strengthen our key areas. When I speak about key areas, our irrigation spaces, because we all know that that's your in Afrikaans they call it your spends. It's your I can't think of the English word, but what we need to do is, how do we work together in terms of implementing and making this knowledge be available to everyone? And then also, how do we work practically together where there's a win-win situation? Let me give you an example. I think there was a few examples mentioned of in the Western Cape and so on, but we need to look at how we can replicate these programs that are workable throughout the country, because I think it's important that we also move away from always being small scale and also create the opportunity for people to grow within the sector. I'm talking about from small scale to semi-commercial and eventually commercial. So to us as the Black farmers in this country, we understand that the knowledge is there, but access to this knowledge, just like I mentioned earlier on, access to the land issue, access to water, access to finance. These are all constraints that we are facing as the Black sector to grow into semi and commercial farmers. And we obviously need solutions around that, you know, in terms of even the land issue. Here we're sitting on land, that a state-owned land, that we cannot use you know, as security. When you go to banks, they talk security, and if you don't have the security, you just get ignored. and then the state is not providing adequate support. So these are the kind of things that we need to revisit and say, how then do we create a system where this adequate support and so that we can have a transition. You know, we're talking about transformation issues as well. How do we transform the sector? Because we all know that most of the resources when it comes to agriculture are in commercial hands, both the water and the land. How do we deal with those core issues? Because those are the issues that we are yes, we've got many other issues to deal with, but those are the core issues. That's my comment for now. Thanks, colleagues.
Heath, thank you so much for that comment again. You know, I do think the discussion about climate smart agriculture and the just energy transition are closer aligned to one another than one sometimes thinks. And that the discussion in general and through opportunities like we have this morning presents opportunities to discuss and delve and get into these things in more detail and getting to the nub of things. With that, I see according to our program, we're almost at the end of it. I'm closing the Q&A session for this part of the program and hand over to Desigan Naidu to conclude for us.
Thank you so much, Janse. That was a very, very rich discussion, and there are very rich comments in the chat. For those who are not looking at it, I would advise you to please engage it. And if you can't engage it now, engage the recording of this seminar and you will catch up with a lot of that. And a lot of the people who have put their comments in the chat, we will be inviting you in to the wider range of conversations that we're going to have in this domain. I just want to take a chance on one thing very quickly. Makoma, if your signal is reasonable, do you want to make some quick comments before I offer some closing remarks? No, that's not working out for her this time. So colleagues, the first thing I want to put out here is that the issues that you have raised and have been raised in many of the other discussions, the thing that is different about, I think, what we're doing now is getting a convergence around many of these issues that are running in parallel streams into a more converged discussion so that we can better visualize the strategy that we need moving forward. And I thank you all for that, and we will continue to encourage this activity. The second thing that I want to put in the plate is that one of the things that the PCC is currently investing in is the concept of a just adaptation and resilience investment plan. So like we have a JET IP around the energy transition in the country, we are now building up a much more complex tool around the adaptation and resilience investment plan. And you would not be surprised that agriculture is one of the front and center sectors for this concentration. And as part of this work, we are currently busy with a 3-sector study, and agriculture is one of those 3 sectors. And you will all be invited back in to participate in that, so that at the end of this, we have a robust gap analysis with very good views around what to recommend to both government as well as all of the other partners that make up the Presidential Climate Commission, and that's all the major social partners around how we can move forward. The second thing I want to put out there is to emphasize that what was said right at the beginning, that in many ways, and we're finding this in multiple sectors, engaging the climate issue gives us an opportunity to readdress in some cases and address for the first time in other cases all of the challenges that we're having in many sectors individually, and then the opportunity to bring them together into a nexus approach. So the one that is very highly relevant to what we're talking about is the WEFI nexus, the water, energy, food, and environment nexus. And we think this is going to organize for us to move a bit more rapidly. The state of the world is difficult right now. And the weaponization of food and around the world is an old phenomenon in our history, but our recent experiences of this have been stark once again, stark for this continent, stark for this country even. And this is something that we have to pay a lot of attention to. The idea of creating an agriculture e-handbook, and I say e-handbook because we're not going to be carrying around the tomes anymore, but version 2023, that both carries the essential information that is required, as well as organizing it for it to be accessible to all of the people, is a great project. And that's something I think we will put some immediate effort into conceptualizing. Then a couple of other points around this. I mean, I encountered the term slow food for the first time today. Thank you, Lisa. It makes so much sense. And the idea of regionalizing some of our food supply so that we have a higher level of food security at more affordable prices with smaller value chains is absolutely critical. The early parts of the experimentation can be difficult. So Tafatswa referred to millet and the Millet Institute of India and the promotion of millet in India as an indigenous crop. Well, in my previous avatar, was involved in some of the earlier stages, and we were assaulted with various recipes. Suffice to say, it takes a bit of a taste change before you can appreciate it sufficiently. And I'm sure there are a few of these challenges lying in our future as well. But some of the broader issues that we have to engage more robustly with the power players, and that's one of those is re-visualizing agriculture as a fundamental pillar of our low carbon industrialization strategy. And we have not been talking about that in that sense. That visualizing agriculture as one of the core components for the economic diversification of different parts of our country to ensure that we get into the realm of lower poverty, lower inequality, and hopefully the eradication of unemployment. And Mpumalanga is a great example of that. One of the biggest opportunities for Mpumalanga as it moves away from the coal value chain is in fact agriculture. It's some of the most arable land in this country that's not under crop currently. And we really, really need to engage that in a more robust way. And we're hoping that the PCC, through its engagements, will be able to influence that sufficiently smartly. But together with that has to come a new look at the way we're engaging the whole issue of agriculture finance. There is a very outdated model at play. Janse and I were in a workshop with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, where a fair amount of this was unpacked. And that workshop acknowledged, and they had many of the big finance players in the room, around moving to a much more adventurous model to launch the opportunity for many, many more entrants into the agriculture sector to create the sustainability that we want. And organizing at the same time to dampen that risk profile, because we don't really want to increase people's risk. And this concept came out again in Africa Climate Week 2 weeks ago in Nairobi, where we were talking about now maybe extra players in that chain so that you can absorb some of the risk from the right-hand end of the chain further in, and talking about public, philanthropic, private partnerships as an extra P in that system. Some of the things we can consider, but the whole idea around organizing for the right kind of shoring in the finance system and dealing with the risk and the issues around insurance, which are so critical. There are some signals in the international domain we have to worry about. So the GFANS group of the big insurance players in the world that formed themselves around COP26 just 2 years ago haven't managed to keep that formation. We need to re-inject energy into that, and maybe the agriculture sector is the one to do it. Last 2 points. One is, it always amazes me that we look at agriculture like we look at a couple of other sectors. South Africa defines with examples some of the best practice in the world. And we know this is true in agriculture. At the same time, we have two problems around that. One is that we also have examples of the worst practices in the world. We also know this is true in agriculture, to the extent where we almost have a two-tier system. And the dichotomies that were raised in the discussion and in the comments are all very real, that we want to engage with this. And the last point I want to make is that organizing ourselves to a climate smart pathway to engage those major SDGs that are associated with agriculture is the only way that is sustainable going into the future. And because we are looking to change so much, surely there must be opportunities for many more new entrants into the new agriculture system. And if you have the right instruments to support that, we too could have a very, very vibrant climate smart agriculture sector in our society, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute to global development as well in the same kind of way. So colleagues, with just those couple of notes to you, I want to thank all of you, but let me start with our speakers and the great panel. Thank you, Tafatswa, for that great framing. And as someone pointed out in the chat, you have been busy pointing your fingers at KwaZulu-Natal on their water woes on the one hand early this morning, and then coming into our session. Excellent. Thank you to all of the panelists. You have been superb. Thank you to our commissioners, both that managed to have a good signal and those who unfortunately couldn't. A special thanks to Lanpo. We're looking to a longer term, vibrant partnership. And what you have is a key instrument and key access points to make this conversation really matter in the decision making at all levels of the system. And that's going to be really excellent. And to this really very knowledgeable group of participants that joined us today. I mean, that chat that's running on the side, we're going to have to convert that to some really, really good work. You will be invited into the next sessions of how we proceed with this. And thank you again very much for joining us today. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you.